Well, obviously, in case you'd missed it, AI became accessible to the masses in 2023, allowing almost anybody to use it, kind of democratized it. Topic of IoT and AI and its impact on our lives is eliciting both excitement and fear across the tech world. And I think this is being felt more in the cybersecurity space. On one hand, we do want to enable businesses to be market leaders through the use of this exciting technology and to improve our offerings. But on the other side, we're faced with enormous challenges as the defenders of our precious infrastructure, data, and customers.
And to help navigate this ongoing conflict, we're going to take you on a journey today. We're going to take you to understand this world of wearable, shareable, and why we think sometimes it's unbearable, mostly because it's giving the cyber criminals a bit of an advantage that we can't really afford them to have. So today we're going to discuss the dangers of rampant tech adoption, the erosion of the social contract, the proliferation of the quantified self, and the potential consequences of IoT and AI misuse.
And why is this a problem for us in cybersecurity? Well, cybersecurity in general, well, most people will agree, it's kind of evolved from the world of corporate IT as mature protocols, architectures and security measures, pretty mature by now. The Internet of Things and AI, kind of a different story. Security policies and implementation in this field are relatively immature. Attackers are, of course, going to take advantage of that. And this is exacerbated by corporations being kind of blindsided by the fact that AI is already being used heavily in their organizations underneath their noses. And this adoption is kind of bottom-up. Individual adopters and their employees rather than top-down and more traditional sort of IT mandate. And this stealth adoption is happening with little oversight of potential security exposure.
The genie is out of the bottle with this one, so we in cybersecurity can't just outright ban it or block it. We need to really embrace it now. Embrace it with the spirit of adventure, but also, of course, with guardrails. And perhaps if we get this right, we might not be the security says no stereotype. We could be the business enablers that allow our organizations to really leverage these amazing tools. Now, a little disclaimer here. I'm afraid due to time, we can't talk about all the great stuff about IoT and AI. You know, this is going to be a bit of a Debbie Downer discussion. But we fully acknowledge that for every bad use of AI and IoT, there is a brilliant and revolutionary one. It's just that this talk isn't about that, unfortunately. But first, let's quickly introduce ourselves. Jeff?
Thank you. I'm Jeff Watkins. I'm a Chief Product and Technology Officer at a company called Lex Design, 500-strong tech consultancy headquartered in Edinburgh with offices in Leeds, Manchester, and London. I just finished my cybersecurity MSc last year, and I've started an AI one this year, so I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. So as somebody interested in both cybersecurity and AI, I think this kind of subject really floats my boat. And I'm also one half of Compromising Positions with my co-host.
That's me, Lianne Potter. And when I'm not hosting the podcast with Jeff, I can be found with my other two hats on, which is Head of Security Operations at Asda, and also as the Anthro Securist, where I am a cyber anthropology and I provide consultancy and research to organizations applying anthropology. Now, cyber anthropology is the study of the cultural components of what makes us insecure. So that's all the way down to our end users, that's to hackers, and that's to the security team as well. If you're wondering why your security measures are not working and persisting with insecure behaviors, it's probably because you've got a cultural problem there. And that's where I apply my skills as an anthropologist in that space. And briefly mentioned, we have a podcast. It is Compromising Positions. We are, I think, the only podcast that only interviews non-cybersecurity professionals about cybersecurity. So we have people like psychologists, behavioral scientists, designers, people from other tech roles that are not cybersecurity related. And what we ask them every time is, how do you feel about cybersecurity? And how would you like us in cybersecurity to treat you and make those controls easier for you? Every Thursday, today is actually a related episode that's come out. It's about the IoT and securing lights in Aberdeen. So that's a little plug over with. Now, the average person underestimates how many IoT and smart devices they have in their home, work, and surroundings. Last year, the number of voice assistants in the world reached 8 billion, which is more than the human population itself. And IoT devices are set to rise to 30 billion by 2025. Now, their proliferation lies in their ease of use, often plug and play once you connect it to a network. Costs, they're really getting cheaper every time. And their inconspicuousness, as well as the shiny promise that they're going to solve all our lives and cause lots of daily improvements to them. The question is how in security are we going to compare with that? Because our controls typically are not easy to use or implement, costly to implement, very conspicuous, things like 2FA and passwords, and also for a lot of people, very inconvenient with no real discernible payoff of if it's actually working unless they've actually seen it stop a security attack. Now, these challenges are not unique to cybersecurity. Whenever we are part of any build process in our organization, it really is usually a trade-off between usability, functionality, and security. And judging by how things are going, our success rate in security isn't that great, that negotiation isn't going too well, and if our reductions of budgets to anything to go by, that's also an indicator too. Is it a unique challenge though? Could the adoption of smart devices be complicating things further?
Well, I think it is. The growth of this second internet, because that's what the Internet of Things is actually a second internet, has changed the way we live and work. It relies on different operating systems, protocols, and kind of things we're largely unfamiliar with in the field. And as we've seen an explosion of wearable devices, smart watches, medical devices, smart glasses, etc., they're often collecting and sharing data, coupled with the fact that these devices are smaller, they're more numerous, and often quite inconspicuous. It makes them really difficult to secure or even notice sometimes. And the shareables referred to in this talk come from anything really sharing data from a wearable device, but also includes things like data being transmitted by other IoT devices. They're not necessarily worn, such as smart bulbs, security cameras, smart toothbrushes, personal assistants like Alexa. You've got a laugh, good one. Or shareable can mean apps also, like MyFitnessPal, which can take data both manually and using a wearable. Whether it's a wearable or shareable or both, they have the potential to impact our privacy, change the social contract, and blur the lines between personal, corporate, and civic worlds. This is the problematic part, which it makes it a complex, ever-changing, and unique security challenge. And a lot of that change there takes place in erosion of the social contract. But what is the social contract? It's a chap called Thomas Hobbes in the 1600s described it as basically as when we, as individuals, consent to surrender some of our freedoms and submit to an institution, be that the government, be that the church, be that hospitals, in exchange for protection of our remaining rights and also the maintenance of social order. We need it because really, our stability of our culture kind of relies on it. Without it, the alternative is chaos, because humans are by their very nature, quite self-centered. But we do need some altruism to kind of keep things ticking along, peacefully. But does the same social contract apply today?
Yes, however, with some changes. By the 20th century, the social contract changed because of the rise of the individuality as we would know it today. And that was when rigid social norms like questioning the government or the church, for example, started to fall away, and we started to see what we would now call in present day a freedom of speech movement. So we wouldn't think twice of people criticising the government, for example. And thus, because of the rise of the individual, society began not only to question how the rules around them, but also began to start challenging them. And some say that the actual rise of the individual materialized in response to institutions' inability to be able to provide for society in the way it had done in the past. Now, this expert from McKinsey in their 2020 publication, which was called The Social Contract in the 21st Century, shows that traditional institutions are becoming unable to sustain the population. And as a result, society as a whole is pulling away from that social contract. And in its wake, a new institution has emerged, one that fosters control algorithmically. And that's the likes of your Metas, your Facebooks, your X, your Google, all those big companies you can think of are the new institutions. And indeed, with most of these institutions, we literally sign a contract to use and access them, which most of us don't read. And as we're aware, and maybe slightly accepting of, if you are not paying for the product, then you are the product. And why is this a new social contract with these institutions? Well, because most developed countries cannot function without tech touching it in almost every single aspect of our daily lives. So the new social contract is said to be one where you give up your data rights in exchange for actually being able to participate in modern society. But the cost to us, the consumer, is the erosion of our privacy and security in unprecedented and obtrusive ways. I mean, considering that quite a few people were really unhappy about giving their details to the Doomsday Book and also the census, it's a bit rich that we're really happy to share all our personal details with Google, for example.
Well, in this new age of permissive sharing, the number of people using wearable devices has reached an all-time high. While the devices offer convenience and connectivity, they also come with a risk that can't be ignored. One of the major concerns is actually a lot of these devices end up getting connected to corporate resources as well, which adds a very big another layer of risk. The lack of DLP on devices when cameras and microphones are present in every device really further complicates the situation. And this puts organizations at risk of data breaches, privacy violations, and cyber attacks. Not that DLP is a silver bullet. I mean, we haven't quite figured out a way to stop people just taking photographs of their screen. I mean, until recently, it was a pretty arduous task if you photographed it and then you had to kind of manually type it out again after you looked it on your phone. But really, nowadays, we've got such quick AI images to text, it really takes a matter of seconds to convert everything. And add in wearables with cameras.
No, not that one.
But stuff like Meta has built in partnership with Ray-Ban presents a new set of challenges for the defenders of data like us. The idea of an always-on lifestyle, which is what a lot of these companies are really kind of convince us that we want, should make us question, did we ask for this? Do we want this? Do we want this kind of lifestyle? Imagine a world where these innocuous sunglasses are worn, not just about town, but
in things like changing rooms, in courtrooms, during personal conversations, moments that are treasured. I mean, maybe it's not a pair of glasses. I know I'm not certainly cool enough to wear a pair of sunglasses indoors, and you've all made the same decision as well. I don't think that doesn't make you cool, though, just not cool enough to wear sunglasses indoors. But what about other less obvious devices?
Like the Rewind pendant. I don't know if people have seen this. Called Everything You've Seen, Said or Heard, for about $60 for the hardware. The cheapest subscription's about $20 a month. I mean, I'm sure they really take your privacy very seriously. But really, is it Rewind we should be worried about?
Maybe not. I think it's actually the users of these products that we need to be cautious about. I mean, like Josh, for example, I mean, somebody might not be able to see that, but what happens when he leaves the company with all this IP? Or Randall, when he's in a much better position to nick all our customers when he goes to our competitors? Or what would be absolutely unbearable in my eyes is if I'm going into the office, the only pleasure I get really is to get the office gossip, and that's being recorded. No, Mike, this isn't cool. You should not be doing this. Let's not pull the tape. Or worse, if you've ever had a conversation with your partner and they've turned around to you and said, I've already told you about that. And then they pull out the tape. And yes, they have. Could AI be the rise of breakups and divorces? Who knows?
What I find kind of amusing and curious about this whole thing is actually the early parts of the tech revolution would get away from the real world into the cyberspace and digital journeys. And now we seem to be walking back into that physical space through something that is referred to as the cyber-physical convergence. It refers to the IoT movement introducing sensors and robotic automation that can observe and interact with the real world, bridging that gap. And with AI in the mix, they're starting to learn and modify the behavior based on those interactions. In fact, we've come up with another term for it, phygital, which I really don't like as a word.
As our wearables and shareables become unbearable, the breach that originates in these worlds, either the physical or the cyber, can result in a breach in the other, which makes our threat landscape a lot more complex. And it requires a convergence of both cyber and physical security approaches to policies and tooling and controls.
But why are we so captivated by these physical devices? So captivated that we've accepted an average of 22 of them in our homes as of last year. I mean, it's a story for another time concerning something called the universal theory of acceptance and use of technology. That's a mouthful. But for now, we'll say it's because we like cool stuff and we can be blinded by it. Whether it be the Tab, Rewind pendant, or Humane AI pin, as shown here. These small form factor devices feel, to me at least, a bit like spy devices, just rebadged as assistants. Except in this case, the spy may well be spied on themselves. Remember, these assistants aren't just recording your voice and what you're seeing, but also your location, browsing history, purchases, etc., as well as all the people around you. So what boundaries are there in public, in the workplace and at home? Technology is moving quicker than legislation in this area. We may not even know when people are treading on these boundaries. Like this recent AI app that matched CCTV images to Instagram photos, showing an example of how little privacy we actually have in public spaces.
And with the prevalence of smart AI devices, camera glasses, and other wearables and such, and our always-on lifestyle means that what happened in Vegas doesn't necessarily stay in Vegas anymore. Chatham House rules, well, just give me a few minutes while I just turn everything off so we can actually do that. But how far do we bend the social contract before these personal assistants are acceptable to some, but absolutely out of bounds for others? It's a discussion we're going to need to keep having amongst ourselves. Because, as the title suggests for this talk, we believe that these products are actually being built without consultation with people and the intended audience. Now, these posts might be in jest, but I think the ick factor, what I like to call, really is something that could help us in cybersecurity, because, to be fair, people in your organization don't really care about the security of the organization, but they do care about their own personal security. So if we can say that what we're doing is to protect their own personal security, we might get some buy-in that way. As cybersecurity professionals, we must enforce boundaries of how we use these devices in our organization. Unfortunately, legislation is lagging behind. The AI companies don't have any kind of onus to want to do anything better about it, and our organizations probably won't do anything about it until we're told to with legislation. So we're kind of in a security limbo, and we better get at it fast deciding what we want to do about this before we get too comfortable with the infringements of data that these devices bring.
I think I agree, kind of these vaguely dystopian AI assistant startups are probably mostly boiled dry when the services are kind of baked into our regular smartphones anyway. But one of the fears about sending our personal data into external services is one of privacy. And there's that much used quote, often wrongly attributed to Joseph Goebbels: if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear.
I've heard this phrase used before.
And that's what happens when privacy and security get conflated. But life's not quite that simple. We all have the basic human right to privacy according to the Human Rights Act of 1998. And it's not just about things like criminal acts when it comes to our personal and corporate interactions. To kind of point that last quote, there's another quote here. There's much more fitting for this talk, attributed to Cardinal Richelieu. Hopefully we can all see that. You see, what we say, do, or believe can be used against us, even if it's entirely legitimate. But what about those wearable devices becoming part of this new social contract? Well, the truth is, the quest for the quantified self is one of those other parts of the allure of these devices. It's not a new concept. We've been tracking our steps, our calories, our weight, and other things for metrics for some time now. But the question is, who's using all this information when we sign up to these services? Why are we willing to give away much more information than required when there's actually just a leaderboard involved? Even though there's no real prize, except for the criminals who may exploit our data. This is, in essence, a kind of narcissism in data form, in our opinion. Well, why do you think that data is so valuable that it should be shared to everybody?
The dark side of the quantified self is workplace time and motion tracking and things like bossware, where employees' time at the computer is monitored. These devices are being used in the workplace for behavioral modification and to monitor things like timed toilet breaks, which in a modern context I think is an erasure of the not exactly human rights, but definitely human decency. And what if that data is used against me one day?
Well, we have one we prepared earlier. The UK government has been recently trialling GPS tracking on certain immigrants coming to the UK, which drew a lot of anger from Privacy International, who found that the people subjected to it had actually had serious mental and physical health impacts. Imagine having a counter for everything you do every hour of the day and potentially having that used against you in the future, especially if there's a lack of transparency on what data is being captured, how much of it, and what it's actually being used for.
Millions of people use period tracking apps every day. So Flow, 43 million, Clues, 12, they're the big players in this space, and people use them for lots of reasons. Tracking periods for one, trying to get pregnant for another. Health data, I am sure you'll all agree, is extremely sensitive data. But in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade in some states in America, we saw privacy experts actually get really concerned about how the data was being collected from these period tracking apps, because they could potentially be used to penalize anyone that's had an abortion in those states. This has put privacy experts on edge, because you could be subpoenaed and have your data sold to a third party, and then that could be used to be prosecuted against you. And with our perpetually recorded lifestyle, what's to say something I did that was legal at one point won't be used against me years later? And we are actually seeing that with the Chinese social contract system, where data has been used to exclude people.
Frightening stuff, really, isn't it? But how much data sharing is really going on these days? Well, let's have a look at cybercrime by generations. This is CyberSafe's O Behave report. It shows that really millennials aren't doing very well in that respect.
Sorry.
Are we surprised by this? The most tech-savvy generations having the most experience, the most cyber incidents. Now, it could be due to generations also being the most online generations, but according to McKinsey, only 1% of people read the T's and C's when they sign up for service. Gen Zs, unfortunately, are the most likely to take risks online. 40% are basically that okayed access to personal information sharing just for a little cookie. But however, on the other side, they're actually more likely to invest in things like security software.
I have to wonder, though, is it a coincidence that a good chunk of these AI and wearable devices are actually being built by what McKinsey calls the most permissive generation? Could this be the reason why these new startups, for example, don't seem as concerned about our privacy? We're coming towards the end of this talk now, but I want to just describe how wearables and shareables might be making our life unbearable through something referred to as the digital panopticon.
So the original panopticon was a work of architecture that allowed a watchman to observe occupants without the occupants knowing whether or not they're being observed, kind of the point of it. And it forced behavioural change, which is also the point of it, even if it is ethically and morally dubious. This metaphor was commandeered a few years ago to talk about totalitarian states. And the parallels between the panopticon and CCTV are pretty obvious, but what about when you step into the world of digital surveillance and data capture?
Unlike the physical panopticon, citizens in the phygital panopticon don't really know what's being watched or by whom. However, we do know we are being surveilled, and surveilled not just by our own government, but also by corporations which make a lot of money out of capitalising on it, and of course, cyber criminals.
Not only that, but the increasing amount of data on offer to governments and corporations is ever increasing. So as we do, the panopticon will surely emerge as a model once more. And also, because our bodies are being brought back into the mix with this cyber-physical convergence. Aside from government surveillance and corporate data mining, the much more unpleasant problem, of course, is IoT misuse. Hopefully, over time, legislative gaps will be rectified, but it won't stop criminals leveraging this technology because they don't play by the rules. Malwarebytes noted that one of the problems with the IoT revolution is that many of the devices are poorly made, insecure by default, and people don't bother to change the default passwords or configuration or patch them. Of course, there's that recent expose on a dark web service that was actually CCTV in people's bedrooms and changing rooms, and it was actually live feeds and not even recordings, and this blew my mind. But off the back of the Amazon Ring breach, you think, hang on a second, we have a problem.
And right now, there's not a lot of government legislation in place to control how we're being watched, recorded, and classified by these organisations, so the burden of security can only land in one place. Us building the products, and us getting at this conference, securing these products. So we've got a little recap here, which we're going to skip through, because I can see Sarah standing.
Well, without that, basically this entire thing has been a call to action for us. It's not something to fear, it means we're just going to a new era of technology. So our methods will need to change accordingly. I put it to us that we should be the champions of responsible use of this technology, acknowledging that we will be used in the home, in public places through hybrid meeting places, and obviously in the physical workspace. It goes far to say that security should fully or partly own AI and smart device implementations, not to be a gatekeeper or a blocker, but to enable it safely. And to do this, we need to start talking more about how we can change to make this new era.
And our final thought, in the world of the machine, knowing what it is to be human is going to be very, very important. It's going to be important to the architects of these products who are building it, want to draw us in, but also make sure it's meeting our needs. It's going to be important to those who want to leverage it, what makes us human against us, and it's going to be important to us to make sure that they don't cross the line of what is wearable, shareable, and unbearable. Thank you very much.
Whew.
So that was bang on time. Well done. So, but before you disappear, and I'm going to steal just a minute or so from everyone's coffee break. We do have another talk to go, but I imagine some people might have some burning questions. So, do you have a question for oh, here we go. We're going to do 2 questions, and then we'll do our next speaker.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was very interesting. It's really interesting to hear touch on employee monitoring. France has recently, the French Supervisory Authority has recently fined Amazon for the handhelds in terms of how they're taking. Can you see that coming more into the picture in terms of the tracking that's being done that people don't necessarily realise?
Yeah, I think particularly the French government are good at kicking up a fuss when it comes to employee rights and things like that. And I think quite a lot of people will want to follow suit with that. I think there's always going to be a trade-off, unfortunately, between how much, do we want Amazon in our country. If I was the government and going, it's a big company in our country, are we going to turn a blind eye? Which is why it's important for us that are working in these new institutions to really say, actually, this isn't right. To actually call that out and say, this won't serve us in the long term.
I think, corporations have to act in good faith and with ethics in mind, or legislation will stamp on them. And it's always better, in my opinion, to be ahead of it by actually being, being a good Boy Scout, effectively.
Okay, we'll have one more.
Okay, I've got cyborg implant. So to me, I think it's a great idea. But how do you feel this more dystopian government started pushing that out to people and the requirements of those cyborgs?
I mean, Elon Musk wants to put neural network links into us all, doesn't he? So, I tell you what, I absolutely love AI and IoT. I am wearing a Fitbit. I am very comfortable with things like that. But we do have to, it has to be, the social contract extends not just to the institutions that we're agreeing with. As we were saying earlier before, the institution was, they were going to look after us. We would give up some of our rights and they were going to look after us. They can no longer do that now. We're seeing this because they financially can't. Look at pensions. Who's going to retire at 71 now? Right?
Maybe 75.
Well, yeah, exactly. They can't look after us anymore. So we're turning to the new institutions. But we have to make sure that these institutions serve us in the same way that the old institutions used to. And my fear is that they won't. And the only way we're going to do that is by not clicktivism or anything like that, but actual activism. We need to shout that we're not happy about certain things.
So Lianne, Jeff, thank you. Are you going to be around in the break? I'm sure you're going to get
Yes,
bombarded with questions.
I also have stickers.
We always like a bit of swag. Thank you.